Have you ever sat in the saddle of a virtual horse, watched the sun set over endless prairies, and thought, this is the real Wild West? Red Dead Redemption 2, The Magnificent Seven, Back to the Future Part 3. No matter where you look, it's always horses, duels, banks collapsing like House of Cards, and cowboys and bandanas shooting each other to the strum of a guitar. But let's be honest. Have you ever stopped to wonder, did the Wild West even exist the way we imagine it? That place where every second man is a gunslinger, every third is an outlaw, and sheriffs settle disputes with a bullet to the forehead? I believed it too, until I started digging. And here's the most surprising part. The Wild West did exist, but not the way we've been shown. It wasn't chaos and lawlessness. It was a time when people built towns, ran businesses, paid taxes, and very rarely shot each other. In this episode, we'll unpack the myths you might still believe today. We'll talk about who cowboys really were, why almost no one robbed banks, and how one unlucky guy became a carnival sideshow after he died. Yes, you heard that right. We'll find out whether high-noon duels on Main Street ever happened, why saloons posted signs saying, "Check your weapons," and how camels ended up in Texas. And most importantly, we'll understand why the Wild West looks the way it does in our minds. Not because that's how it was, but because that's how it needed to be. So if you're ready to trade romanticized shootouts for truth, let's go. Because what you're about to learn will make you see your favorite westerns in a whole new light. And yes, you'll definitely smile. Especially when you hear the story of the guy who robbed a train with a toy gun. Chapter 1. Who was a cowboy, and why he's not who you think? A cowboy isn't a hero. He's a worker, just a herdsman on horseback. Picture this: dust, sun, endless prairie. On the horizon, a man in a wide-brimmed hat, revolver on his hip, riding a stallion. He's the symbol of freedom, courage, the American spirit. But here's a question, friends. What if I told you that image is almost entirely made up? Let's start with the word itself, cowboy. Where does it come from? Simple. Cow plus boy. So, a boy who herds cows. Not a gunslinger, not an avenger, not a hero, a ranch hand. I worked as a herdsman myself as a kid. Does that make me a cowboy? Of course not. And most real cowboys didn't think of themselves as anything special either. Here are some facts that shatter the myth. Many cowboys didn't own their own horses. They rented them, like we rent cars today. Revolvers were a luxury, cost as much as a month's or even a year's wages. Most cowboys simply didn't have one. Jeans, Stetson hats, didn't become common until later. In the 1870s, cowboys wore whatever they could get, often Mexican clothing. But the biggest truth? Cowboys were incredibly diverse. You think the Wild West was all white guys with mustaches? 1 in 4 cowboys was black. Yes, after the Civil War, thousands of freed slaves headed west looking for work, freedom, and a new life. Take Bill Pickett, for example, a black cowboy who invented bulldogging, leaping from a horse onto a steer and biting its lip to bring it down. Today, it's a standard rodeo event. Or Nat Love, a former slave who became one of the greatest riders of his time. And then there were the Mexican vaqueros, who'd been on these lands long before Americans arrived. Cowboys borrowed chaps, saddles, and even riding styles directly from them. Not to mention Native Americans, Chinese prospectors, and Irish railroad workers. The Wild West was a multicultural mess, not a white monolith. So why do we only see one kind of cowboy? Because even during the Wild West era itself, people started romanticizing it. In 1883, a man named William Buffalo Bill Cody created a show called Buffalo Bill's Wild West. It toured the US and Europe, featuring staged Indian attacks, shootouts, and races, everything audiences wanted to see. It was the first movie of the Wild West, and it was fake. Later, Marlboro ads, Hollywood westerns, and even some historians cemented the image: white, silent, deadly. But reality? Reality was far duller and far more interesting. Because the real cowboy didn't shoot on Main Street. He worked 16-hour days, slept under the stars, and feared falling off his horse more than any outlaw. And if you think the Wild West was all about violence, wait, because next we'll tackle the holiest of myths, high noon duels. Spoiler, they almost never happened. Chapter 2. Duels. Truth or Hollywood fairy tale?
You imagine a duel like this. Two men, noon, dust swirling, eyes locked, and bang! But in reality, the sheriff would have just kicked them out like troublemakers. Be honest. Have you ever dreamed of standing on Main Street in some dusty town, wind blowing tumbleweeds, saloon doors creaking, your rival across from you with a revolver on his hip? You wait for the signal. Tick-tack, tick-tack, and suddenly, bang! Isn't that the ultimate Wild West scene? But here's the real question, friends. Did duels like that ever actually happen? Short answer, yes, but almost never the way movies show them. Long answer, much more fascinating. Imagine, 1859. Two guys decide to settle things. They march to the town square, ready to draw. Then the sheriff shows up. He looks at them and says, "You idiots lost your minds? Get out of here. Not on my shift." And they leave. Yes, you heard right. Sheriffs didn't encourage shootouts. They shut them down. Because in town, the law applied, and whoever fired first was automatically a murderer. So most duels happened outside town, in hidden spots where no one could see. And even then, they weren't epic showdowns. They were messy, chaotic brawls. Take cowboy Hugh Anderson, for example. He got into a fight in a saloon, shoved his opponent outside, pulled a pistol, and kept shooting until the man dropped. Then he fled, afraid of jail. That was his first duel. His second happened when revenge seekers tracked him down. They agreed to meet, turned their backs, walked 10 paces, spun around, and started firing until their guns were empty. No one died. So they threw down their pistols and fought with knives instead. Sounds insane? Maybe. But that's how most duels really went. Chaotic, ugly, rule-free. Now, the big reveal. You played Red Dead Redemption for one thing, those one-on-one shootouts where everything depends on your draw speed and ice-cold nerves. Well, here's the truth. There was only one documented case that matches the Hollywood ideal. It happened in 1865. An unknown Wild Bill Hickok argued with an old acquaintance, Davis Tutt. They spotted each other 70 meters apart on the street. Townsfolk dove into buildings, terrified. Both drew, fired almost simultaneously. Only Davis died. And what happened next? Wild Bill was arrested. He posted bail and walked free. That's the whole story. But, and this is key, newspapers spread it nationwide. Legends grew. He's killed hundreds. He shoots faster than lightning. In reality, he was responsible for no more than 8 killings in his entire life. And yes, he did become a sheriff, after killing his best friend. Only in the Wild West. But the ultimate irony? Wild Bill didn't die in a shootout. He was shot in the back of the head while playing poker. In his hand, 2 pairs, aces and eights. Ever since, that hand's been called the dead man's hand. Did he go out in style? Maybe.
but definitely not like the movies show. Because real duels weren't spectacles. They were dirty, terrifying, and almost always ended in prison or death. And if you think banks were robbed daily on the Wild West, hold on, because the next chapter shatters another sacred myth, that banks were easy targets for outlaws. Spoiler, in 40 years, only 8 were robbed.
Chapter 3: Banks, Trains, and the Man Who Became a Sideshow. Movies show banks as cardboard boxes full of cash. In reality, they were fortresses, with a sheriff waiting right across the street. You've seen it a million times. Outlaws burst into a bank, wave revolvers, the teller trembles, the safe pops open with one kick, and the heroes ride off into the sunset with sacks of gold. But ask yourself, how many banks were actually robbed on the Wild West? Ready for the answer? 8. In 40 years, from 1859 to 1900, across all U.S. states. Yes, you read that right. 8. Why? Because banks were built like fortresses, flanked by shops, windows boarded up, only one entrance. And directly across the street, the sheriff's office. Imagine charging in with a gun, only to face an armed lawman who's been waiting for you all day. Not exactly a smart move, right? And then there were the safes. Huge, iron, locked with complex mechanisms. Dynamite? Sure, it was used, but mostly in train robberies, not banks. Speaking of trains, train robbery was real. Across America, 241 cases were recorded. In 28% of them, dynamite was used. The most famous robber? Butch Cassidy. Once, he used so much dynamite he blew up an entire rail car. But even here, myths are exaggerated. No one ever leapt from a horse onto a moving train roof. In reality, outlaws hid in bushes, stopped the train, threatened guards, and often left empty-handed. Why? Because plans fell apart over tiny details. Take this 1900 story. 5 outlaws attacked a money train, shot the cashier. As he bled out, he threw the safe keys into a far corner and passed out. The gang searched his body. No keys. Searched the car. Nothing. Scratched their heads and walked away. Sounds like comedy, but it's true. But the wildest story belongs to Elmer McCurdy. This man is the legend of losers. First, he tried robbing a bank. Blew the safe with dynamite. Didn't even scratch it. Then, with his gang, he mistook trains, robbed a regular passenger car, and found $40. 3 days later, cops shot him dead. End of story? Nope. Instead of burying him, the undertaker embalmed his body and put it on display as a curiosity. Then carnival owners bought him. Then a movie theater, displayed before films. Then the Hollywood Wax Museum. People thought he was a mannequin. Only in 1976, during a TV shoot, an actor accidentally broke the mannequin and discovered human bones inside. Elmer McCurdy was finally buried in 1977, 66 years after his death. That's your romance of the Wild West. But not everything was tragic. In 1916, Bill Carlisle robbed a train. Took the money, but left large bills behind, giving small change to the guard and a woman for their trouble. And the craziest part? He used a toy gun. Yes, you heard right. And it worked. Because on the Wild West, people almost never killed unarmed civilians, women, or children. Most outlaws wanted money, not blood. And in 90% of cases, they either ended up in prison or got killed. So if you're waiting for a movie about the perfect heist, maybe look for a story about failure instead, because failure was the norm on the Wild West. But then comes the real question. If shootouts were rare and banks almost never robbed, why do we think the West was so wild? The answer lies in the next chapter, where we finally examine real violence statistics. Chapter 4. Shootouts. How many were there, really? You think people shot each other daily on the Wild West? In one town, there were 0 murders for 2 straight years. Let's tackle the biggest myth. Was the Wild West really as bloody as we're told? Movies paint a picture. Bodies in the streets, every other person a killer, sheriffs solving disputes with bullets. But reality? Over 60 years, roughly 500 shootouts were documented across the entire Wild West. Sounds like a lot? Maybe. But more than half had no fatalities. Take the most famous one, the gunfight at the OK Corral, 1881. Films show an epic battle, dozens of shots, heroism, tragedy. In reality, 30 seconds. 9 men fired at point-blank range, 3 people died, and 1 survivor sued the sheriffs in court. Yes, you read that right. A man survived a shootout and claimed his rights were violated. This isn't the bloody West. This is the legal system working. More examples. The Frisco shootout, 1884. A drunk cowboy fires into the air, breaking the law. Local lawyer Elfego Baca arrests him. The cowboy's friends rage. Gather 40 to 80 men surround Baca's house. A 33-hour siege begins. The house takes over 400 bullet holes, but Baca isn't wounded. 4 attackers killed by him. When ammo runs out, the gang just leaves. This isn't fiction, it's history, and they even erected a monument to him. But such cases were exceptions. In a typical Wild West town, population 1,000 to 3,000. Murders per year, 0, 1, or 2. In one town, 1869 to 1870, 0 murders. In another, 31 murders in 5 years, and it earned the nickname Murder City. For comparison, today, some U.S. cities see 50-plus murders per 100,000 people annually. So why the myth of constant violence? Because one death in a small town was big news. Newspapers wrote about it. People told stories. Legends grew. And photos? Those iconic shots of cowboys with revolvers on their hips? Staged portraits. People wanted to look cool, like Buffalo Bill's showmen. In reality, towns posted signs. Leave your weapons at the station. Violators? Fined. Sure, travelers carried rifles for protection on the trail. But in town, guns meant trouble. Even legendary gunmen, Buffalo Bill, Billy the Kid, Wild Bill, most of their exploits were newspaper hype or self-promotion. Billy the Kid, said to have killed hundreds, likely killed no more than 8 or 9 people. So if you think the Wild West was wild because of cowboys, you're wrong. It was made wild by the government itself. And that's what the final chapter is about. Chapter 5. Who really made the West wild? It wasn't cowboys who made the West wild. It was the government when it began exterminating entire peoples. You think the Wild West was about cowboys versus Indians, endless war, scalps, and stagecoaches under fire? In reality, through much of the mid-1800s, cowboys and Native Americans traded more often than they fought. It was profitable. Tribes sold meat and hides. Cowboys traded flour, guns, tobacco. Yes, there were attacks, but over 20 years, only about 350 people died in stagecoach raids by Native Americans. For perspective, a single modern car crash can kill more.
Real savagery began in 1871. That's when the U.S. Congress declared, "No more treaties with Indians. Everyone goes to reservations." That was the turning point. The U.S. Army launched a systematic destruction of indigenous lifeways. How? By wiping out the bison. Bison were the economic and spiritual foundation of Plains tribes. Millions once roamed. By 1890, fewer than 1,000 remained. The government paid hunters $1 per tongue so they wouldn't haul whole carcasses. Without bison, tribes couldn't survive. They faced either starvation or surrender. This was genocide. And that's when the real wildness began. Not from cowboys, not from outlaws, but from state policy. So when you hear Wild West, remember, it wasn't made wild by chaos, but by power.
Conclusion: why the myth matters more than the truth. Now you know. Cowboys were mostly laborers, many black, Mexican, or native. Duels almost never happened. Only 8 banks were robbed in 40 years. Shootouts were rare, murders even rarer. Real brutality came from the government, not bandits. So why does the myth live on? Because America needed a hero. Simple, strong, white, solitary. The symbol of continental conquest. The cowboy became that symbol, even though he never looked or lived that way. And that's okay. Movies aren't textbooks. Red Dead Redemption isn't a documentary. But now, when you saddle up as Arthur Morgan again, you'll know. The real Wild West wasn't more epic, it was more interesting. Because it had camels, sideshow corpses, lawyers surviving 400 bullets, and cowboys who never fired a shot. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the true romance of the Wild West really lies. Not in perfection, but in ordinary, messy truth. So next time someone says, "That was the real Wild West," smile, because now you know what that really means.